What's up, Richard Bryce here. Today I'm going to help you to get more power on your one-handed backhand. Now, I've been relearning to play left-handed for the last 6 months. I've just started to play again right-handed, and the most wonderful thing has happened. I have got so much more easy power than I ever had before. So in this video, what I want to do is explain where that power has come from. How have I developed so much more power without picking up a racket with my right hand for 6 months? And I'm going to show you some really simple stuff that you can work on that's hopefully going to allow you to generate a lot more power, but without all the effort. And because of that, you're going to be able to hit a lot more consistently. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you do, it'd be awesome if you give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to my channel. So the key to efficiently generating power on your backhand and getting that easy power is to fully utilize your kinetic chain. So to get the correct sequence of body movements to allow you to generate racket head speed at the contact point. And this is actually going to be the same for all ground strokes, but here I'm going to quickly break it down for the one-handed backhand and then show you some really simple things that you can work on to hopefully make a big difference in your ability to generate power. So if we start from the start, you'll be doing your split step, you'll be doing a unit turn. Often with a one-handed backhand, you're going to be trying to pivot and get the right foot forward so you can step in on it. But from this unit turn position, we've got the racket high, because we're going to be starting to generate a little bit of racket head speed by the racket coming down and forwards. But the key piece here is that most of the force, or the initiation of the force, comes from this back leg. So I'm driving this back leg into the ground. So often this knee caves in a little bit. If you watch a lot of the top players play, they'll really exaggerate the knee caving in on all of their shots. So the knee will cave in, and they're going to be pushing into the ground. This hip will come through. Then my torso comes through, then the arm comes through, and the contact point is out in front. Now the tricky piece when it comes to all the strokes, but especially the one-handed backhand, is timing the dropping of the racket and getting the hip moving. And really they happen at about the same time, but you want to think about driving from that back hip in order to generate your force. So if I show you just kind of dropping a few balls, it looks like it's happening almost at the same time, but it's starting from that back hip. I'm starting from there, this movement here. So efficiently generating the power is all about getting that sequence correct. Now obviously one of the key pieces to this is going to be the timing. If you don't start your swing early enough, you aren't able to get all these pieces of the puzzle working correctly and meet the ball out in front, because we've got to meet the ball out in front. We're trying to turn our body into a whip. So we've got the racket high, we're dropping it down, we're driving through that back leg, but from about this point forwards, we're basically just kind of throwing our racket at the ball. So rather than arming it through, we're trying to use the whole body and then just let the racket do the rest. So the timing piece is going to be huge, and that's where the visual system comes in. Unless you can accurately judge distance and depth and you've got amazing spatial awareness, it is really hard for most adult tennis players to start their swing early enough and to get it right every time, so they end up hitting the ball late. So to help you with that, I've created a free Tennis Vision starter program. I'll place a link up there and I'll place a link down below. Start working on that, spend about 5 minutes a day working on your visual system in addition to the stuff that we're working on here, and it'll make a big difference. But we've got to use the full kinetic chain. So now I want to show you some simple drills that you can use and practice that are going to make a big difference. Okay, so now you understand the biomechanics and using the kinetic chain more efficiently. We've got some simple drills that we're going to work on to help you transition it onto the court. I want you to really focus on the hip. All this stuff is going to be about using your hip more. So we want to practice using your hip more in both a neutral and an open stance. And the open stance has been a really crucial piece for me, because that wasn't something that I developed when I was younger. But now I've been relearning to play left-handed, I've worked on my open stance, so driving off this position more, and it's transitioned into a much better quality backhand. And then when I get in tricky positions, I've got a better quality open stance backhand. So I want you to practice in both from the start, and we're going to do it without a ball, without a racket first, because when the ball's there, things get a lot more complicated. So you want to program these movements in and then make them more complicated once they've become more automatic. So it's really simple. You're just going to practice ripping that hip forwards. So this is my hip. I'm trying to push it forwards. I can think about it in two ways. I can think about it that maybe I'm trying to push something forward. So I've got a ball there and I'm trying to push it forwards. Or maybe you can think about wearing a belt buckle and you're trying to rip it to the right. So I'm wearing a belt, I've got a buckle, I'm going to rip it that way. But just get used to that movement. What does it feel like just to whip those hips forwards and be violent with it? You know, you want to generate power, you want to be aggressively using your hips, and if you watch a lot of the top players, that's exactly what they do. So practice ripping that belt buckle to the right, pushing that hip forwards, and then also practice from the open stance. And it's a little bit more awkward from the open stance, but you want to get used to throwing that hip forwards. So what happens? In order to do it, I have to straighten this back leg, I've got to push through the back leg, but you just got to get used to the movement first. If you can't do the movement without the ball, you're not going to suddenly do the movement with the ball. So just practice it over and over again. Then you want to incorporate your arm. So we're not even picking up the racket yet. Pretend that your arm, and you're going to use the back of your hand as the racket. But now the key here, and this goes for all ground strokes, but especially the one-handed backhand, is we've got to try and turn this rotational speed into forward speed. Where a lot of players go wrong is they open up and they pull across their shots. Same on both sides, but when you pull across your shots, that's when you tend to miss-hit it and frame it. We want to be hitting through the ball. So we're trying to get the speed going through the ball as much as we can, rather than across. So we're going to practice that with our shadow swings, and what we're going to think about doing is using our hips to throw our arm forwards. So you're almost turning your body into a whip, or like you're trying to throw a frisbee, but you're trying to use this hip to throw your arm forwards into the ball that way, and then if you look, it just kind of follow throughs into the position that it would follow through. So practice that, ripping the hip forwards, throwing the racket forwards, both stances, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult on the open stance, and this is also something you want to get used to. When I'm doing this, the contact point relative to my body is very different to when I'm doing this. So again, I want to think about throwing my hand in that direction from this hip. So what does it feel like to do that? So you practice no arm, both stances, then you bring your arm in, both stances, and then once you've got that, then you start to bring the racket in, and again, you're just thinking about throwing that racket forwards with the back hip. And again, you practice that from an open stance, you're throwing that racket forwards from the back hip. Now this is errorless learning. We're not worrying about the ball. There's no ball. We're just programming these movements. So if it doesn't look perfect, that's okay. You're just trying to get used to what it feels like to do them. Then you want to get out there on court and start to work on things. But I highly advise you get yourself a ball basket, a bunch of balls, and you practice this stuff when the ball isn't coming at you first. Like I mentioned earlier on, this contact is going to be key. We've got to meet the ball out in front to make this happen. If the ball's back here, we're only part way through our swing, we're only part way using our hip before the ball's on us. So you've got to get that early contact point. So drop feeding yourself is the easiest way to make it happen. Also, when you're drop feeding yourself, you can practice the power generation. Like we all know what it's like. The ball's coming hard at you, it's easy to send it back with power. But when you've got to generate your own pace, that's much trickier. So because the drop feed has no pace on it, you're going to get used to generating the speed. Now, along with this, I don't know whether you noticed when I was practicing all of these movements before, I'm trying to keep my head still. You're always going to train that into your system. So even when I'm doing these drop feeds, I'm not even looking where the ball's going. I obviously want it to land in, but what I'm working on is I'm working on ripping my hip forwards and throwing my racket into the ball first. I'm not working on trying to get the ball in. That's going to come later. But at the moment, you're just programming these movements in. We've done neutral stance. Then we're going to go open stance. And again, just what does it feel like to throw that back hip forwards and turn it into forwards movement of the racket. So really simple stuff. But this is the way that I recommend you practice it. You understand the biomechanics that it's foot, driving into the ground, hip, torso, and then we're throwing the racket forwards. Practice it in neutral stance, practice it in open stance without the ball, then start to bring the racket and the ball in, and things will work. And like I said at the start, this comes in addition to being able to start your swing at the right time. That's why the visual piece is so crucial. It's the thing that lets so many adult players down. If you can't accurately predict how far that ball is away, all this stuff that I'm talking about is never going to work. So I highly advise you grab hold of that free Tennis Vision Starter program, spend 5 minutes a day working on it, spend a bit of time each day working on this, and honestly, if you don't play tennis for the next 2 weeks, you train your vision, you train these movements even without the ball, you'll step back on court, you'll have more power on your backhand, it'll be working more efficiently, and then you can keep on improving things from there. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, it'd be awesome if you give me a thumbs up. Any questions or comments, leave them down below.